So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Tonight, Donald Trump calls Keir Starmer, and there are more hints a peace deal in Ukraine could be close. We're told the pair agreed Zelensky needs to be put in the strongest possible position. We also hear they've agreed to meet soon, but so far, no date's been set. Also tonight, the Prime Minister has been taking flak over his decision not to compensate women hit by changes to the state pension age. I'll be joined live by one of his own new MPs who's urging him to change tack. Also tonight, new figures show inflation is above target and looks likely to stay that way, should the finger be pointed at Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Plus, Nigel Farage warns he's picked up very deep disquiet over the UK's plans to give up sovereignty of the Diego Garcia military base. The Foreign Office says the deal is going ahead. And we'll take a look at when politicians find themselves haunted by the ghosts of Christmas past. My ghost of Christmas past tonight, possibly offering redemption, Caroline Lucas and Tim Montgomery, who'll be with me for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, I want to start the programme tonight with some breaking news we've just had in the past hour, which is that the Prime Minister has spoken to the incoming US President, Donald Trump. I'm pleased to say our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here with the very latest. What's happened, John?
Well, we've heard from Downing Street about this phone call. We've yet to hear from Mar-a-Lago. Remember, he's not yet the president. We're not going to hear from the White House. The key line, really, is where number 10 says the Prime Minister reiterated the need for allies to stand together with Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression and ensure Ukraine's in the strongest possible position. Now, this comes after days of talks about possible negotiations. and some sort of deal. Mr. Trump, of course, has said, I can solve this war in a very short time as soon as I become president once again. The other thing Mr. Trump has said that may alarm some of the allies in Europe is he's dead against this idea of sending missiles, these missiles into Russia, which he says will escalate the war. Now, the Prime Minister's message really on Ukraine is very much as he was saying earlier this week on his trip to Norway and Estonia. So he's used that phrase tonight, stand together with Ukraine. When he was in Estonia, he was talking about it's extremely important to Ukraine to be put in the strongest possible position. We allies have to stay united in our support for Ukraine. And he also said when he was in Norway that the allies had to double down in support and not take our eye off the ball. Now, obviously, Ukraine may have been top of the agenda, but there were other issues as well. You'll like this. The president started off by saying how much he enjoyed meeting the Prince of Wales in Paris when they met at the reopening of Notre Dame. Then they talked also about not just Ukraine, but the Middle East. The Prime Minister underscored the need to work together to ensure peace and security in the region. So that's another volatile area where there will be some concerns about President-elect Trump's views on that. And then the last line, they agreed to keep in touch and look forward to seeing one another at the earliest opportunity. Now, does that mean some international summit? Does it mean the President-elect coming here? Does it mean Mr. Starmer going to the US? There has been some suggestion that Sir Keir may go to Washington, perhaps in February, although Number 10 are playing that down. But clearly, the Prime Minister is very keen to be on the front foot with the President-elect, given all the worries about some of his views on Ukraine and also, not to mention, you just mentioned Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage stood up in the Commons today and said, I've just returned hot foot from a very full Mar-a-Lago. I spoke to several members, senior administrators of the incoming administration who will be in the White House in 32 days' time. So you've got Mr. Farage saying he's got a hotline. Well, the Prime Minister's saying, oi, I'm the Prime Minister. I talk to the President. Significantly, Mr. Farage did not meet the President during his trip to Florida. He didn't meet Vance and Elon Musk, but the Prime Minister will be pleased that he has, if you like, seized back the transatlantic agenda. They did actually talk in the statement from Number 10, they have talked about that special relationship once again between the two countries, as well as the economy and the close and historic relationship between the two countries. So all sounds very good, according to Number 10. Let's see what the Trump camp say. Really interesting. So could potentially be a visit as soon as February. We'll wait and see what actually happens. And that phone call, I'm sure, may well feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the former Conservative special advisor, Salma Shah. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? I'm pleased to say we're joined by the former leader of the Green Party, Caroline Lucas. Good to have you back in Westminster.
Thank you. And
political commentator and founder of Conservative Home, who's recently switched allegiances. We're going to come on to that later, Tim Montgomery.
We should have the fact that we have to welcome Caroline Lucas back to Westminster.
Exactly.
Caroline and I disagree on nearly all politics, I think, but I admire her independence of mind, and it is ridiculous that someone who's done so much for politics as you've, breaking through the first-past-the-post system, putting green issues on it, is not in the House of Lords.
Not yet.
So Sky and The Times or something need to do a campaign on this. So, anyway, another time.
Started here. Caroline, what do you think about this call? I mean, it's been a complex relationship, hasn't it, between Donald Trump and the Labour Party? It's not long ago that he was accusing Labour volunteers helping the Democrats of election interference. I mean, what do you think about? Do you think Keir Starmer's right to be cozying up to Donald Trump? He is going to be the US president.
Well, he's got to have a relationship with him. Of course he has. And I'm sure the timing of this phone call will have been absolutely, music to Starmer's ears in the sense that he has just had to sit through PMQs, hearing Nigel Farage sounding as if he was the key interlocutor with the coming White House administration. So you do get that sense that this is a way of Keir Starmer kind of pushing Farage back down in his box. But also, although when you first look at that statement, it doesn't look as if it's terribly significant, it does look a bit like motherhood and apple pie. In fact, I think it is important that Starmer is underlining the importance of action in Ukraine and also in the Middle East. And it feels as if there is a key message there that is being sent that is important.
Yeah, and it feels like, NATO allies, apart from the US, trying to put Ukraine in the best possible position if there are going to be negotiations. I mean, the whole tone has changed overall. Tim, what do you think about what's going on in Ukraine and the tone of that call?
Well, look, Russia needs to be defeated in Ukraine in some way, and Russia is being defeated in Ukraine. They thought they'd win the whole country. Thousands of people are dying almost every week by some estimates in this war. Russia has lost control of Syria, as we know. The war must end in some way, even if it's not a complete humiliation for Putin, because at the moment we're in a World War I type scenario. It's almost trench warfare with no real territory changing hands, but lots of young lives ending or being injured in ways that will disfigure lives forever. So Trump is a game changer. He takes risks. And unfortunately, I think we're in a position at the moment where in Ukraine we do need to take risks, because carrying on like this is not a way forward.
I guess, as you say, Trump is a game changer. Do you worry, Caroline, that he could push for a deal that doesn't necessarily suit the Ukrainians?
I mean, I think that can be the only conclusion of when he says that he could get this conflict ended in a day. I think that means that he would indeed overrule Zelensky and just basically say, get to the negotiating table on any terms. And I think that would be a concern, because I do worry that if Putin gets away with this, that he will then be emboldened to go elsewhere. So that really matters. And I think that, as well, we need to make sure that Starmer isn't so focused on Trump that he forgets about the importance of the EU. You would expect me to say that. I'm now a co-president of the European movement, but I am concerned that we need to recognise where our allies stand on this, and our values and our future, I think, is with a close relationship with the EU. So, yes, of course, we've got to deal with Trump, but let's also remember where our real allies are.
And what's the UK's place in all of this? There's so much focus on Zelensky, President-elect Trump, Putin. I mean, what's the UK's part in all this? Do we matter?
Well, I was a big critic of Boris Johnson when I was still a Conservative Party member, but it was actually, I think, the best thing he and Britain did. We armed Ukraine almost before any other nation. It's one thing we should be really proud of. And so I think we have a moral authority to talk about this issue, but we are at the moment in danger of almost like a forever war situation, whereby the sides are losing all these young lives without actually changing anything on the ground. So something needs to be done. And I think Britain will be a voice of reason, I hope, between that American desire to end this in some form and that European understandable anxiety. We're the neighbours of Russia about Russian expansionism.
OK. Well, in the last few minutes, President Zelensky has just been meeting with the NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte. There's a meeting of European leaders taking place. I should say David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is there for the UK. Zelensky has been saying it's a good opportunity to talk about security guarantees now and tomorrow.
Almost everything said. So, but it's really...
Well, we also want to talk about the story that's dominated the last 24 hours in British politics, the fallout over so-called WASPy women. It's a story about a generation who feel that the government moved the goalposts on their retirement and basically didn't bother to tell them. But really, this is also about something deeper too, about whether politicians are bold enough to tell the truth. Labour are in a mess because they wanted the votes of these pensioners and effectively weren't brave enough to tell them no until now. And as for the Tories, well, they've been looking to land blows today, not least Prime Minister's questions. But they actually agree with Labour. They wouldn't offer compensation either. It is a mess that wouldn't have come about if politicians were able to confront difficult realities quickly and honestly. That may mean saying no more often and more clearly. Well, we'll see if we can get some honest answers from politicians shortly. But first, Amanda Acas has this report.
Save the winter fuel!
Cutting pensioners' winter fuel allowance. Charging farmers inheritance tax.
What do we want? Justice!
And now denying compensation to the WASPy women. The government say they've been forced into difficult decisions because of the nation's finances, but it's not what many people thought they were voting for.
Have you betrayed the WASPy women, Prime Minister?
The decision not to compensate women hit by increases to the state pension age led to attacks from all sides at PMQs.
The Deputy Prime Minister said Conservatives were stealing their pensions. She promised to compensate them in full. Another broken promise.
I believe these women are owed compensation for the injustice done to them at the hands of the state.
Does the Prime Minister really understand how let down WASPy women feel today?
The PM argued compensation wasn't justified.
The research is clear that 90% of those impacted did know about the change. And in those circumstances, the taxpayer simply can't afford the burden of tens of billions of pounds of compensation. But I do understand the concerns.
A report by the Parliamentary Ombudsman in March found that women born in the 50s may have been adversely impacted by the government's failure to adequately warn them the state pension age was increasing to 65 and recommended compensation of up to £2,950.
We found that there had been maladministration in the way that the government had communicated the changes to state pension age. It's true that what had happened really had a lasting impact on their lives.
Christine is one of those women.
Politicians, especially Labour, actively campaigned prior to their election to say they supported the campaign. And as soon as they're in government, they backtracked.
How did it make you feel when you
Very angry. Pure and simple, it's a betrayal, 100%.
Finding £10 billion to compensate the WASPy women wasn't in Labour's election manifesto, and the Tories weren't stumping up the cash either. But coming after a whole series of unpopular policies, the public's faith in Sir Keir Starmer was already plummeting. The latest Ipsos poll this week suggests 61% of people are dissatisfied with his performance. This latest decision, after he and so many Cabinet colleagues once publicly backed the WASPy women, will surely only make that worse. Amanda Acas, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, shortly before coming on air, I spoke to the Labour MP, Brian Leishman. Just to start with, tell us your reaction to the decision on WASPy women yesterday.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Ali, it was a combination of being shocked, stunned, angry and, in no small measure, disappointed.
You say you're disappointed. I mean, you know, you've been an MP for, what, a few months? Mm-hmm. Did you expect to be on TV saying that you're disappointed with the government this quickly?
Certainly not. Yesterday's decision, as much as it was a shock, it's completely wrong. This is a historical injustice that WASPy women have faced. We campaigned in opposition to correct that injustice, and now that we're in power, we really should deliver on that.
I guess you say, you know, you campaigned in opposition. The argument from the government would be this was in the 2019 manifesto, not in the 2024 manifesto. Keir Starmer's made clear he wants to break with the past. He wants to be in government, make tough choices, not be a party of campaign. Does he have a point there?
Well, when we ever frame things, as politicians do, as difficult choices or tough choices, when working class communities, the length and breadth of the country, become poorer from it, then it's the wrong choice.
What do you think the level of anger is amongst Labour MPs? Because I've been messaging quite a few new MPs like you today. A lot of them behind the scenes are quite angry, but very few are willing to come on the programme like you. What do you see the level of anger as?
Speaking with parliamentary colleagues in the Parliamentary Labour Party, then yeah, there's a lot of disappointment and a lot of frustration and anger at yesterday's decision, and I think that's understandable.
So do you think the position's sustainable? Do you think Keir Starmer's going to go back on what he's done?
Well, that's ultimately a decision that the Prime Minister and the leadership team will need to make, but I think it's incumbent on people like myself as backbench Labour MPs is to hold our party to account and hold our party to the standards and the principles that really our party is founded on.
Was it quite a difficult decision for you to go public with your anger?
No, it wasn't at all, because I think if we look at it bluntly, what's right is right. And as I say, this is a historical injustice, and we did campaign on this, and we really should deliver on it.
So do you think, do you see this as a U-turn? I guess, should politicians be held to things that they said a long time ago that weren't in their manifesto?
Well, I think when we talk about things, and maybe this is just a very kind of binary way of looking at it, this is wrong. We should be correcting this injustice for the benefit of WASPy women. And there's no doubt getting away from it. This has been a failure of consecutive governments, but it's now a Labour government, and it's our problem that we've inherited, but it's our problem that we've got to sort.
£10 billion is a lot of money. That would come from elsewhere. Where do you think it should come from?
Well, I've been very vocal about this in my 5 months, or just over 5 months as being an MP. I was one of 30 MPs from the House of Commons that signed a pledge saying that we should have a 2% annual wealth tax for the super rich. And that's talking about the multimillionaires of assets over £10 million. The millionaire and the billionaire class, we've seen over the last 14 years of austerity, gross inequality that is only getting worse. For me, that's the solution. When we look at it, the annual wealth tax would have raised, I think, in the region of about £26 billion, plus the equalisation of capital gains tax would have been another 14. That would be a good start.
So you think the government's got the wrong priorities then?
I would say that we've got to try and equalise society and improve basically for the many, not the few in society.
What happens now? I mean, they've made this decision. There's no sign they're going to go back on it. What's your plan?
Well, I would say that a parliamentary colleague, Ian Byrne, had an excellent question today at Prime Minister's Questions when he basically was saying we should have a vote as a House on this. I completely endorse that.
So how are you going to make that happen?
Well, certainly from behind the scenes, as I say, I think it's important that the backbench Labour cohort, we basically speak with one clear and coherent voice and basically put our frustrations and our thoughts towards the leadership.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thanks for your time.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Shadow Treasury Minister, Gareth Davies, for the Conservatives. Can I just confirm what the Conservative position is on WASPy women?
Well, as you know, the Ombudsman reported just before the general election, and we were reviewing that. But we're not in government anymore. The Labour Party won the election. They're in government. They need to own this decision. And as you heard at Prime Minister's Question Time today, we are exposing the hypocrisy of this Labour government. Just like with farmers on the family farm tax, or the pensioners on the winter fuel payment, or businesses with the national insurance contribution tax hike, they've let WASPy women down. They made it really clear in the House of Commons, in all these photo opportunities, that they wanted to compensate WASPy women, and within a few months, they've let them down. So it's for them to make that decision. It's for them to own that decision as a political choice.
OK, so you say they've let WASPy women down, but can you just answer the question and tell me what the Conservative position is?
Well, we're not in government right now, and it's really important. Well, I wish we were, by the way, but it's really important that
but you must have a position
the government take responsibility for the decisions that they make in government. We were reviewing the Ombudsman report, but we were always very clear that this was a significant amount of potential compensation that was being talked about, and we have to manage the public finances responsibly. But
so that sounds like you wouldn't be up for giving WASPy women compensation.
We were very clear that you have to manage, the public finances responsibly, and we were reviewing the Ombudsman report. But as I say, we're not in government.
But why don't you have a policy on it? I mean, we had Reform on this morning and they said, look, we can't afford it. I think the problem is people feel like they just want you to say what your position is.
Well, our position is that it's a very difficult and complex case. The Ombudsman found that there was no financial loss as a result of maladministration, which many of the campaigners suggest there was.
So for that reason, are you saying that you...
But again, I have to stress, we are not in government. It is for the government to take positions.
But you want to be in government, so don't you need to say what you would do if you were in government? Well, and how can you attack Labour if you would potentially not pay that compensation?
What we are suggesting, and what we're saying in terms of attack on Labour, is the hypocrisy, this consistent approach by this Labour government to say one thing before an election, and as soon as they get into power, they do another thing. It's the hypocrisy, I think, that's driving everybody crazy in the country, whether you're a farmer or a businessman, or whether you're a pensioner.
Well, you said you wouldn't raise taxes, and then you got into government and you did raise taxes.
Well, you're talking about the national insurance contribution rise. Well, that was in a situation, by the way, where we just faced a once-in-a-century pandemic and we believe in paying down our debt, again, managing finances responsibly. But the Labour government attack on the Conservative Party is that, you know, we've left them in this horrendous state. It's absolutely terrible, and we didn't manage the public finances responsibly. But at the same time, they do attack us for that difficult decision to try and bear down on that debt at that time by increasing national insurance. So it is a very different time. There is no pandemic now.
On inflation, can I get a reaction to figures today?
So this is the second month in a row that inflation has gone up. It's I think, an 8-month high for inflation. And it's not really a surprise to us because after the budget, the OBR were very clear that the policies that were decided by Rachel Reeves and this Labour government would be inflationary. We know that the decisions that are made will push up prices for longer. The consequences for ordinary people is that prices in the shops will go up, mortgages will cost more because interest rates will have to stay higher for longer, businesses will have to pay more to borrow to be able to grow their business or invest. And as a country, we face a situation where debt interest now is over £100 billion, so the interest that we're paying as a country on our debt. And the more that interest rates go up or stay higher, that's more money that could be used for other things.
I mean, I guess, you know, again, are you the right people to be making the attack on this, given how high inflation got when you were in power?
Again, context
I mean, this is nothing compared to the spiral that we saw.
Context is so important in this situation. So inflation rose across the world, in part, but largely due to the invasion of Ukraine and the consequences of that to push up wholesale gas prices in particular. And we did face 11% inflation at one point, 19% food inflation, just like Germany and lots of other countries around the world. And we worked as a government and as a Treasury when I was in government with the Bank of England to bear down on inflation. And you do that in two ways. One, it means you make difficult decisions that could be inflationary and you don't take those decisions, you don't do the things you want to do because that could push up inflation. But also you support the Bank of England by not pumping the system with money that would be inflationary. Labour, within a few months, have done the opposite. And we are now seeing inflation go up. We worked so hard as a country to go from 11% to 2%. And within just a few short months, because of the decisions in that budget, inflation's going up again. And this is going to cost ordinary workers across the country.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about inflation in a minute. But first, let's talk to Caroline and Tim about the backlash we've seen to the WASPy women decision. Caroline, I guess, I mean, it was interesting to hear from that Labour MP, 2024 intake, and already he's been quite vocal against the government. Were you kind of surprised by the level of reaction?
I'm not surprised by it because I think this is actually really serious and goes to the heart of the issue of political trust. So many MPs would have put their own names on the line in campaigns up and down the country with the WASPy women, saying as they believed that their party was going to do right by them. And let's remember that Keir Starmer was standing alongside those WASPy women as recently as 2022. It wasn't ages ago, it was very recently. And so those WASPy women had every right to expect that their issues were going to be addressed by this government. You then have the parliamentary ombudsman saying as well that, or ombudsperson saying as well that work needs to be done on this and it needs to be responded to. And so to see now the Labour leadership essentially turn their backs on the WASPy women, I think is just completely wrong. It's short-sighted because WASPy women, believe me, will vote, and there's over 3 million of them. It's wrong because it was a historic injustice. The ombudsperson has said action needs to be taken. And it's wrong because it's betraying a really fundamental trust. And it goes, you know, the trouble is that whole section that you just showed us with your interview of the Conservatives as well, just reminds us about why people are so frustrated with the politics today, because the Conservative wouldn't tell you what their position was going to be. They just wanted to take pot shots at Labour. Labour are pretending now this is going to cost tens of billions, Keir Starmer said. Actually, the ombudsperson said it was up to 10 billion and probably less. So, you know, it's just an object case of why we need more honesty in politics.
Tim, I guess, you know, the government aren't on this evening. Their perspective is this is £10 billion, this is expensive. Should Keir Starmer have to keep this pledge? It was in the 2019 manifesto, but not in the 2024 manifesto.
Well, I don't actually agree with Caroline on the end result. I don't think it is an affordable policy. I think women of that period were treated very badly, and I think some of them have been misled in this campaign. But the country is in a very serious financial position, so I don't think it is affordable. Where I really do agree with Caroline, though, is I think we're in a dangerous place at the moment with our democracy. If you look at some of the numbers at the moment, young people in large numbers are actually beginning to say, I wonder whether dictatorial regimes work better in some respects. Faith in our politicians, the former party I was part of, failed catastrophically in government. I'm genuinely very surprised at how quickly Labour is struggling. And there was a very cavalier attitude from Labour before the election, making promises that they haven't been able to keep. And Keir Starmer is not the most charismatic of politicians. You know, remember the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown at Christmas. That's not his strength. He could have sold himself and really connected to the electorate as someone who told the truth, someone who got business done, someone who could be trusted to run the affairs of the nation competently and with predictability. He needs a holiday and he needs to reset his government because at the moment he doesn't seem to have any consistency and so his brand is in trouble and I think that's why you're seeing some of the restlessness of the Labour MPs so early in the Parliament.
Our viewers who I'm sure won't have forgotten that Tim used to be a Conservative for a long time and you've recently defected to...
And I partly defected because of the comprehensive failure of my party and I'm generally, politically for reform it's an opportunity, but I'm generally worried at how quickly this government's failing too.
We'll talk a bit more about reform in a moment. But, Caroline, something that seems to be coming up, including among some Labour MPs, is the question of whether the party is alienating older voters. We've obviously had the decision on winter fuel allowance. Now this. I mean, the average age of a Tory voter, I think, is in the 60s, of a Labour voter is in their 40s. So, you know, do you think they think they can face the wrath of older voters?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I totally agree with you that those two decisions certainly are both really hitting older voters a lot. But they're not doing great for young people either, to be honest. And I think one of the things that's really missing from Labour is any kind of compelling story about why different decisions are being made. There's no sense of, if there are difficult decisions to be made, why that has to be done and what the gain will be later down the road. And so, in a sense, you just get this sense of a piecemeal set of decisions that are basically pissing off different parts of the electorate, whether it's the farmers, or whether it's, with the two-child benefit cap, whether it's now with the pensioners. And there's no sense of a compelling narrative about difficult decisions now, but something better coming down the line. And he's got to get that story, he's got to get that narrative, and he's got to get some hope back in it. Otherwise, I agree with Tim, things are looking pretty grim.
We're agreeing far too much.
Much too much.
We'll have to change that.
No, it's bizarre. I mean, Tim, do you think Labour are alienating older voters, or do you think it's, as Caroline says, younger voters as well?
I actually think it's too early to say this definitively, but that announcement on winter fuel at the start of this, I think, may come to define this government. The British people will tolerate a lot of hardship if they think we're all in this together. But the singling out of pensioners in that way so early on, and a slightly trying to blame the Tories for it. The Tories messed up. They are responsible for a lot, but I think people know that they look at France, they look at Germany, they look at most post-COVID Western economies. The West is in trouble. There is no money. And what they want from a government is honesty, not just saying it's the Tories, not picking on individual groups. As Caroline was saying, a comprehensive account of what's wrong and how we're going forward. And that hasn't happened. And Keir Starmer still has time to offer that to the country. And I think we're ready as a country for an armchair sort of chat about where the country is, not being sold false promises. And he needs to reset very quickly. OK,
thank you both. We'll come back to you very shortly. You're watching The Politics Hub coming up. Inflation rises again, deflating any hopes of an early cut in interest rates. We'll have the details next.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
Free, wherever you get your news.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her.
Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. Well, we can take you live to Washington now, where interest rates have been cut for the 3rd time. There you go, that is what is happening live in Washington, but I'm afraid there is little hope of that happening here. We found out today the inflation rate here in the UK rose to 2.6% in the year to November. So that is not going in the right direction, fell slightly below the Bank of England target previously of 2%. Well, with more on that, here is our business and economics correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan.
The festive season, it should be boom time for the economy. But there are warning lights flashing. Inflation is on the up. Shoppers in Manchester say it's going to be an expensive Christmas this year.
I'm a PhD student, so I don't exactly get a lot of money. So it's actually really difficult to get people the gifts I want to get them because I can't afford it this year.
I try and sort of make my own things to keep it a little cheaper, which is it's a bit more humbling to gift someone something that you've created yourself.
I've got 7 grandchildren, and if I buy them all, you know, like £20 a present, which might sound loads to some people, but I've reduced that this year because I just think it gets too much. It gets silly.
Inflation has come down considerably since the worst days of the cost of living crisis, but it is rising again. The index hit 2.6% in November, above the Bank of England's 2% target, and it's likely to stay above that target for longer too. The past few years have left everyone poorer. Prices are more than 20% higher than they were in 2021. But the Chancellor says she's not being complacent.
I recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite. That's why in the budget we increased the national living wage, a pay rise for 3 million workers, and it's why we froze fuel duty so that motorists are not paying more at the pumps.
But the measures in the Chancellor's budget are also pushing inflation higher. Her budget included a big increase in public spending as well as tax rises that will put upward pressure on prices, keeping inflation above target for longer. The headline rate should eventually fall back. But if the past few years have taught us anything, it's that inflation can be temperamental and stubborn, quickly moving against us. It explains why the Bank of England is taking a cautious approach to cutting interest rates. The Monetary Policy Committee is likely to keep interest rates on hold when it meets tomorrow.
I think there were quite significant expectations for interest rate reductions. They've not happened this year, and they're not going to happen, I think, next year. So interest rates are probably going to hover around 4 to 5%.
Interest rates went up like a rocket, but they are coming down like a snowflake. With inflation on the up again, we have some time to wait before they settle. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Well, let's bring Caroline and Tim back in on this. Caroline, look, it's not good news for the government, but how much can Rachel Reeves be blamed? I think, governments are quick to take credit, aren't they, when inflation comes down, and don't like to take the blame when it goes up.
I mean, I'm not sure how much she can be blamed for this one yet, anyway. I mean, let's see what happens over a number of months. It feels like it's too soon to blame her specifically for it. What I would blame her for, if I'm allowed to make a little segue here, would be not raising more money from something like a wealth tax. She's going to use this as yet more ammunition for not spending on public services, or not actually coming up with what's needed to mend our broken country in many ways. And what I would love to see to be part of the conversation, and I'm delighted that Tim and I will now, I'm sure, have a vociferous argument.
Yeah, I was going to say, at last.
At last, yes.
Clear green water.
To levy some taxes on wealth instead of having all of the taxes on income would be a way that she could raise some money and therefore be able to put some money in public service and begin to honour some of the expectations that so many people had when Labour came to power.
Right, Tim.
Well, I won't get into a big debate about wealth taxing because we're here all the time. But on the inflation thing, Caroline is largely right. It'd be unfair to blame Rachel Reeves squarely. But I would also say some of the decisions they've taken, like the agreement to have big increases in public sector pay without reforms at the same time. The borrowing is big in this country at the moment. International markets are therefore demanding a premium on the interest rates we charge. So she needs to be careful. Inflation clearly hasn't gone away. And so it's one of the worst things that can happen in an economy. It robs from the poor, it undermines confidence from investors. And so she needs to keep borrowing and pay rises under control. Government isn't easy.
And Caroline, look, I mean, we haven't had much time to talk to you, but you haven't been in Westminster. You, I assume, would prefer a Labour budget to a Tory budget. I guess,
That's a very low bar, it has to be said, but yes, I would.
Do you feel better about how things are going under the Labour government than you did previously?
I think the trouble is that people don't feel better. They've got the economic figures, if you like.
You must love Ed Miliband, though. Surely
I do love Ed Miliband. Yes, I do.
Should be in your party.
He should. I totally agree. But
that wasn't a compliment from me, by the way.
But he is not, sadly, running the budget. And so what I do worry about is that people are not feeling better off. And that's why I do come back to the issue of more wealth taxes. It's unusual that we don't do this, and we don't have the story as well. Because if I could just make the comparison, say, with Clement Attlee, after the Second World War, the debt to GDP ratio then was almost double what it is now, and yet there was a vision there, and he created the NHS. Yes, and we've got a climate crisis, which is, potentially massively significant, and we also have broken public services, and we could have a government coming in now with a vision to say, yes, we're going to levy a wealth tax, or yes, we're going to use some more government bonds, whatever. And this would be a way of having a bold story to tell, because Attlee, back then, was creating the NHS, mandatory secondary school education, pensions, council housing. There was an offer. There's no offer yet under this Labour government, and people are not feeling better off.
OK, don't worry, we will ask for your political heroes too at some point, Tim. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. The government says that the deal to hand over the Chagos Islands will go ahead, as Nigel Farage tells MPs that Team Trump are concerned. We'll discuss all of that next. Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, the government had to come to Parliament today to address reports that its deal to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands was about to collapse. The agreement to transfer the Indian Ocean archipelago to Mauritius includes Diego Garcia, home to a military base used by the UK and the US that has crucial strategic importance. We'll listen to what Priti Patel, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, put to the government and the minister's response.
When the whole world can see that this proposed deal was falling apart, the Foreign Secretary and this government have tried to flog it constantly. Not only is this monumental failure of statecraft from this Labour government, it is also a significant humiliation for the Foreign Secretary and his credibility and the Prime Minister. And why are Labour putting the security at risk, ignoring Chagossians and letting our stand-in go into free-falling?
She referred to media reports. There is a huge amount of speculation. Let's get back to the actual facts on this, Mr. Speaker, which is that Mauritius, the Prime Minister has confirmed himself in Mauritius to his Assembly that he is willing to conclude this deal with the United Kingdom. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker, and we will protect our national security and our interests.
Well, we've obviously got to show you the telling contribution from Reform leader Nigel Farage, who told MPs that his sources within the Trump camp were telling him they were worried about the deal.
I've just returned hot foot from a very full Mar-a-Lago. And I've spoken to several members, senior administrators especially, of the incoming administration who will be in the White House in 32 days' time. Let me assure you, there is very deep disquiet amongst all of them as to what this may mean for the long-term future of Diego Garcia.
Right, let's bring Caroline and Tim back in. Tim, your new party leader, Nigel Farage. I mean, he's kind of changed the dynamic, hasn't he? Because he's got this hotline to Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, he is genuinely very close to Donald Trump. I don't think they agree on everything. And I think it's silly, actually. Nigel Farage is not everyone's cup of tea, I take that. But if...
Understatement.
But well, I'll ask you, Caroline. If you were the Prime Minister of this country and, you wanted to get on with a man who is quite difficult to get on with, he's a controversial, and you had someone in your own Parliament who knew him very well, I think you'd at least invite Nigel Farage into Number 10 for advice, and even if it's to slightly pacify the relationship, not using him at all seems a bit silly.
It depends how much you could trust him, and I'm not sure that I would trust him enough to do that personally.
Really? Even just a practical...
Really? Okay. Really.
I mean, Caroline, on reform more broadly, they've only got one more MP than there are Green MPs. They're getting a lot of attention, though.
I mean, coverage they get is just outrageous. You did get a lot more votes. Yeah. But still, there is, if you look at the representation in Parliament, just one more MP and, the amount of airtime they get is huge.
Is that because Nigel Farage is managing to cut through, do you think?
I think just the media are fixated with Nigel Farage. I mean, you just are. And even if you're having the conversation about why you're so fixated, you're still being fixated and talking about him. And if we had just even a fraction of the amount of time talking about the Greens and what we were doing and some of our concerns, that figure that we have of 4 MPs in Parliament would go skyrocketing.
Tim, is that fair?
Look, the media get a lot of stick, and sometimes I give you a stick, Ali, but... Farage is a very gifted politician. He does know how the media...
He's a very good communicator.
He does know how the media works. That is true. But he's also good at understanding the public mood. And why I think the media are giving him the attention that they do is because, like on Brexit, he understood the power of an issue before a lot of the other politicians did. And he knows now, I think in a way that the Westminster establishment doesn't, that the anger at our political system is huge. And no party is espousing that better than him.
But he is weaponising that. That's what I have a problem with. So if you take the climate issue, I don't know where you are on the climate issue, but the climate issue is real and it's getting worse. And to see Reform deliberately weaponise it and turn it into a culture war issue and make it into something that is, so divisive is, I think, unforgivable.
Well, I don't see it as a culture issue. I see it as a cost of living issue. And
how much is it going to cost us if we don't address the climate crisis?
A huge amount.
A huge amount more.
But why should it cost British pensioners and British industry a huge amount if China and other countries aren't acting? Because all, therefore, we're doing is saddling our industry and our own pensioners with costs without addressing climate change. That's the problem. We need to move together. And I just worry some of the zealotry, for example, of Ed Miliband is
the
meaning we're
language you're
investing in
using,
immature technologies that will saddle us with costs that make us uncompetitive.
This is not zealotry. This is ambition, recognising that actually it is in our interests, both economically and environmentally, to be ahead of the game and try to get as much investment into the green economy as we possibly can. We know that creates jobs. We know it gets emissions down.
Mainly in China, as far as I can tell at the moment, we're spending an awful lot of money importing Chinese raw materials while they're still investing in coal.
Well, China is also massively investing in green energy
but
too.
mainly coal.
And they are also, it has to be said, using quite a lot of their energy, creating all kinds of products that we then import back into the UK. So it's very convenient for us to say our emissions have gone down because essentially we've just outsourced them to China. I love this, sorry, that we've taken...
We're back to normality.
This is a sort of friendly debate that
we're back to normal disagreeing
mostly friendly
anyway.
debate we like on the politics hub. But Tim, you know, have you been totally at ease with your decision, no regrets? It must have been a difficult decision.
It's been some of the most testing... I'm actually very tired, and I apologise if I seem tired on this programme. It's been one of the most exhausting periods of my life. 2 weeks, it's been non-stop. I don't regret the decision, but I'm more aware than I realise of how much I've hurt a lot of Conservatives. They feel very disappointed. And when you hurt people you respect, it's not easy. Politics is a family as well as a cause. I've made the right ideological decision, and definitely. But you never want to feel like you've let people down, and I know people are sad at what I've done.
So do you feel like you've let people down?
No, I don't think so, because I think my values are the same, and it's a cliché, but I think the Conservative Party left me. And the majority of people who've contacted me are tempted to do the same or feel disappointed with the Conservatives. Kemi Badenoch is leading a party at the moment that could face extinction. And if the mood of the people who've been talking to me is accurate, I don't think she realises how grave the situation is.
We're going to have to leave it there
Sorry.
because we've got some fun to come and we don't want to miss that. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Members of the Cabinet are haunted by photo ops of times past. We'll look at other political pledges that came back to bite leading politicians.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, a teenage driver who took laughing gas behind the wheel is jailed for 9 years after killing 3 of his friends in a high-speed crash. We'll hear from the father of one of those boys. Plus, we'll bring you a special report on a family forced to live in temporary accommodation for years. And Marcus Rashford surprises kids at his old primary school, delivering presents to all 420 pupils. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
They were prepared for protest, but not on this scale.
How difficult is this to police tonight?
Off the scale. I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis, up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live. All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay.
We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited.
Hello.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
The holidays just got merrier and brighter.
It's been everything you'd expect and hope for.
Feast your eyes on our favourite time of the year with gifts galore. Magical moments and holiday cheers.
Snappy and certain, right on the line!
Premier League festive fixtures. Premier League festive fixtures on USA.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, Christmas time is perhaps an appropriate occasion for the ghosts of the past to come back to haunt politicians. That was the experience of Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves yesterday, when pictures like these emerged of them supporting the WASPy Women's campaign, even as they decided not to pay that compensation. But it's far from being the first time that a politician gave hostages to fortune.
There's no easy way to say this. We made a pledge. We didn't stick to it, and for that I am sorry.
We're all committed to what we said in the Conservative Party manifesto, which was that we were going to bring net migration down to sustainable levels, and that means not the hundreds of thousands that we've seen in recent decades, and that means tens of thousands.
The levels of migration are far too high.
I think the country requires fresh leadership.
What I want is a negotiated solution. I think there is a deal to be done. We have had constructive talks.
We will not return to boom and bust.
News really is not just the headline figure. The better news is that this is clear indication that the exchange rate mechanism is working, as I said it would.
Right, let's bring Caroline and Tim back in.
You didn't have something from Caroline in there. Something that she
No,
said
Caroline, we were digging and we couldn't find anything.
Well, there you go. Politician with integrity. Rare, but here
Or
we go.
someone who's never been elected to government.
Watch it.
Do you think that politicians can ever recover from these ghosts, these pictures from the past, Caroline?
I mean, I think they do recover, but clearly it's hugely embarrassing. But I think a distinction needs to be made as well between changing your mind, which I think is a reasonable thing to be allowed to do, and just being plain hypocritical. And the trouble with the whole WASPy Women example was that was, frankly, just plain hypocritical, and it just stinks. Whereas, if over a number of years you've changed your mind on something, I think politicians should be allowed to do that. And, you know, I'd love people to do that on things like Brexit while we're talking about it.
I'm going to have a little defence of politicians at this point, actually, because while it is true, tuition fees, immigration, there's a big... There is an actually academic survey, and I looked into it, and it's actually robust, that most of the time, most promises and manifestos are actually kept. You know, for a long time. What we remember are the broken ones.
Yeah.
And so there is improvement. I'm not saying, you know, we've talked today about trust in politics. It's a real problem. But we do exaggerate it. Most of the time, political promises are kept.
And that really is important, actually, because if we just end up having total contempt for the whole political class the whole time, that is a really grim conclusion to draw. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier, Tim, about, you know, how young people might now be looking to rather more draconian ways of organising a society.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. And we've ended on quite a serious note. But is sorry ever enough? That's a difficult question. We will see you tomorrow with the last Politics Hub before Christmas.
It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, 3 lives lost and another changed forever. A teenager